All right, welcome class. Today, me and my fellow group members will be discussing and assessing Jonah's definitions on throughput, inventory, and operational expense, as well as utilizing these definitions in a service industry example. All right, let's get started. Cool. Okay, so when Jonah and Alex had a conversation over the phone, Jonah defines Alex throughput as being the rate at which a system generates money through sales and not production. So highlight that little part right there. So if something is sold, clearly throughput. However, if something is produced but not sold, Jonah says this could not be considered as throughput. So if we take Costco as an example, because Costco's selling plenty of toilet paper and water right now and making people wait long times in line. Costco grossing $50 million within a span of a few months would be considered as throughput. But if Costco has $100 million worth of inventory, but only sells $50 million of that inventory, the other $50 million that wasn't sold cannot be considered as throughput. So if we assess Jonah's definition on throughput, it's a bit unconventional and a bit different from the quote unquote normal definition of throughput, which is defined as production of materials and items passing through a system without accounting for whether or not it's been sold. So if I highlight that visual part, oops, sorry. All right. And this definition clearly assisted Alex and his plant to get back on track, even though their plant wasn't a traditional sales setting. This definition works well with sales. However, it also works with the service industry, which we'll be explaining later on. But right now, my fellow group member, Kyle, will be going more in depth on inventory.
Thanks, Christian, for that great piece on throughput. Hi, class. My name is Kyle, as some of you know. Next, we're going to take a look at the value metric for inventory. So first, we're going to kind of remember what inventory is in a normal system. So if you can think back to undergrad or even just maybe a few classes ago, we used to think of inventory as something of a product. So inventory would be the amount of product that you have on hand to sell to a customer, which is great for manufacturing processes, but it doesn't necessarily translate well to the service industry or other sectors of business. So what Jonah go ahead and offers up in this book, the goal is we should look at inventory from the perspective of money. So Jonah's definition is inventory is all the money that the system intends to invest in purchasing things in which it intends to sell. So it changes the focus from producing inventory or having inventory on hand to all the money that's spent to purchase things that it wants to sell. Jonah also takes a look at inventory and says this can be a great indicator of how productive or efficient a system is operating in all industries, not just production, not just service, but in both combined. So if we take a look at Costco, as Christian mentioned, they are a big company that's doing a lot of business right now. Things that would fit Jonah's definitions of inventory are also traditional, but we have to look at them from a sense of money. So pallets of water, right? So we wouldn't look at the number of pallets of water that Costco has on hand. We would look at the money that Costco has spent on bringing that pallet of water in. So that's going to include things like shipping costs, any tax paid while purchasing the product. That's going to be their total inventory cost, not just the amount of product that's sitting in their warehouse that they can sell. We're going to look at, hey, I have $1.2 million of inventory to sell rather than I have 200,000 pallets of water. So our group kind of took a little assessment of Jonah's inventory definition, and we just kind of figured that it's not that different than a regular inventory system. Let me highlight that for you guys. Not that different from a regular inventory system, except for that it refers to the product as a unit of currency. So as discussed in our example of Costco, they're not referring to the number of pallets of water, they're referring to the money spent on those pallets of water. And then our final assessment is inventory is treated much how it's done on a financial statement for those of you guys with an accounting background. Inventory on a financial statement is expressed in terms of a value of currency, not necessarily a number of units produced, just because it doesn't have the same meaning for people who are looking at those financial statements. So that's all we have for you on the value metric of inventory. We're going to pass it on to Lino, who's going to take it on to the third and final metric and take a look at some little service examples related to the hotel industry. Thanks, guys.
Hi class, this is Lionel. Let's continue from where Christian and Kyle left off and look at the third measure of plant performance, which is operational expense. So what is operational expense? Operational expense is the money the system spends in order to turn inventory into throughput. Let's use Costco as an example. It spends money on labor, warehouses, technology, to name a few, in order to facilitate sales of its products, which are all considered operational expense. And this truly fits Jonah's definition from the book, The Goal. If you look at the assessment of this definition, plant performance can be impacted by all the three measures. If the inventory is high, usually indicating that there is a bottleneck, this could result in lower throughput and increased costs or operational expenses. Operational expenses could still be high if the throughput expected is higher than the capacity of the plant, thereby impacting plant performance. A plant with a high throughput, low inventory, and low operational expenses is a balanced plant. Let's look further into and contrast this in the service industry. So let's look at all the three definitions and see how they apply in the service industry. So using a hotel for our model for the service industry, let's look at the definition of throughput. It's the rate of occupancy of hotel rooms, which is paid for by customers. Now let's look at whether the traditional definitions fit relative to how Jonah defines throughput in the service industry. The traditional definition of throughput does not work for the service industries since it measures all the materials or units produced instead of materials or units that are actually sold. In the case of the hotels, they are the number of units that are leased out. So Jonah's definition of throughput works because it puts the materials or units in terms of money. So if something is produced versus sold, that does not count as throughput. So let's use the hotel as an example again. If we have 200 rooms and there are 15 vacant, those rooms are not considered throughput because they are not leased to customers and hence there's no sale. So if rooms on the hotel are not being occupied by customers, they don't produce money for the hotel. Thus, they are not considered as throughput. Continuing to the next measure, which is inventory, let's look at how it holds good for the service industry. So using the hotel as an example of the service industry, the hotel rooms and all the money spent in purchasing that product is considered inventory. Now let's contrast this with the traditional definitions and Jonah's definitions of inventory and see how it applies. The traditional definition of inventory does not work for the service industries as it measures it by units produced or on hand, and the service industries by definitions do not produce. Jonah's definition works because it puts everything into the perspective of money. A hotel spends money on furnishings, electronics, general fixtures. That's all money spent purchasing things that it intends to sell. So although a hotel doesn't directly sell those items, it does sell a comfortable stay in a hotel room. Meaning that if the room do not have these amenities, no one would be able to stay in them. Continuing to operational expense in the service industry. Let's continue to use the hotel as an example. So the costs incurred in labor, advertising, technology, electric and gas bills, they all constitute as operational expenses. And let's look at contrasting the traditional definitions as opposed to Jonah's definitions. The traditional definition of operational expense is ongoing costs that are not directly associated to production. Now, the hotel doesn't produce, and hence the traditional definition doesn't fit. But let's look at how Jonah defines operational expenses. He looks at expenses in terms of money spent in labor, advertising, in order to convert inventory, that is rooms, or furnishings or fittings, to occupied rooms, which is sales and hence throughput. So Jonah's definition fits well. So all labor, advertising, electric, gas costs are all utilized to turn inventory, which is a furnished room, into occupancy that constitutes sales.